I played Dredge for 100 days, and here's what happened. In the opening cutscene, we are introduced to the two main characters of this game. Me, a fisherman responding to a job listing in the newspaper, and the tugboat I sail around on, which I took into some deep fog. Let's just say that didn't go particularly well for me, and I made quite the grand entrance into the real start of the game. The next morning, I awoke on a dock outside of a small town with a short and rather rotund man staring me down. He informed me that he was the mayor of this lovely small town known as Greater Morrow. He also told me that my fishing boat was totaled, which I never would have guessed based on last night's events, but he's kindly lending me a boat that I can use for now. The mayor also warned me that I should be back at port before nightfall, which isn't at all ominous. And with that, I was off to go start my new job of fishing for the town of Greater Morrow. This game was highly recommended to me as a real-life marine biologist who loves fishing games, and I wanted to play the real Dredge game before experiencing the Dredge DLC for Dave the Diver. So what a better way to play the game for the first time than through a 100-day challenge. Sailing out into the bay for the first time is where I discovered how time works in this game, and how I was going to track my progress through the 100 days I planned on playing. Basically, if the boat is moving, or if I am actively doing something, time is passing. But if I sit still on the water, time stands still alongside me. When I move, time moves rather quickly, and even more so when you go fishing. Fishing in and of itself is kind of a strange little quick time event minigame, where you need to avoid the gaps in these spinning wheels to reel in your rod. But with the basic game mechanics figured out, and the baseline for the challenge established, I wanted to see the variety of fish this game had to offer. I say fish, but I also immediately got distracted by this shiny golden thing in the distance, which turned out to be a message in a bottle from the 21st of August, 1927. I didn't quite know what that meant yet, so I just continued about my merry way, exploring a little bit until the sun got lower in the horizon. I realized that all I had caught up until now was a single blue mackerel, and seeing as I was now employed as the fisherman for a whole town, I should probably fix that. So back to fishing for blue mackerel I went, and I very fortunately caught my first trophy fish. As far as I understand it, trophy fish are just a bigger, more valuable version of the same fish, and don't have any special properties. So I caught a few more normal fish, and then I returned to port for the night. Upon pulling up to the dock, I was once again greeted by the mayor, who informed me that I could essentially rent to own the boat that I was using for the low cost of $50, which is not a bad deal if you ask me. Boats are generally quite expensive. And to pay for my end of that deal, I learned that I could sell whatever I had caught that day to the fishmonger. The fishmonger didn't seem particularly pleased to see me, but was still willing to take my catch. Fish sell for certain amounts of money depending on species, size, and freshness, so that trophy fish I caught earlier was worth more than the standard blue mackerels I had brought a few more of in. In grand total, my 3 mackerel netted me $26 in profit, with $4 going towards my $50 debt. After leaving the fishmonger, I ran into the mayor again, who this time informed me I could hire a shipwright to help me improve my little boat and kit me out with more advanced engines, hooks, etc. And she also warned me that there are some other sources of damage I could encounter with my boat, which again, very reassuring. I can't afford any of her wares right now, so I slept through the night and headed out again on my boat in the morning. Admittedly, I wasted a bit of time in the first few days because I didn't quite understand the full gameplay loop, so these days could have been a bit more optimized. I mostly spent my time trying to raise money to pay off my debt, and that involved a lot of relatively aimless sailing while I tried to work out which of the fishing spots I could actually use with my default equipment. Until it inevitably turned dark while I was still far away from port, where I got my first real warnings of what else this game had in store. At least I was quite close to the safe zone, so I quickly pulled up a few more arrow squids and headed back to the safety of Greater Morrow for the rest of the night. In the morning, I was approached by a new character. This time, she was the grizzled lighthouse keeper, who seemed to have some reservations about talking to me. She asked me why I was here, for which the only answer I knew was that I came to fish. I was hired to be a fisherman, after all, but that elicited the strange response of her telling me that there wasn't anything here for someone like me, and that I should move on. That seemed patently untrue, as I had just confirmed that there are in fact fish in this area, but that was the end of our conversation, so I quickly headed back into town to see if there was anything else that I needed to do. That's when I encountered the mayor again, who asked if I would sail over to Little Morrow to deliver a package. I had every intent of exploring the full map, so this was a good opportunity to get started. I accepted the mayor's damp, dripping package and headed over to see Little Morrow for myself. Upon pulling up to the dock, I encountered the dock worker I was supposed to give the package to. He took the paper and checked the contents, although he wouldn't tell me what was inside. As payment, he gave me some money, as well as a strange old book that he thought I could use. Turns out this game has a reading mechanic, where traveling and passing time on the boat progresses the amount of the book that I've read, and that unlocks new gameplay mechanics and upgrades for me. And with that, I set off to go fishing for the rest of the day. I found another message in a bottle to add to my collection, and safely made it back to Greater Morrow for the evening. Once there, I talked to the shipwright to see about getting myself a new fishing rod so I could use some of the spaces I had been passing over, and she installed this new, slightly more advanced rod on my boat. I went out in the morning to use that new rod, where I caught my first shallow water fish, which should theoretically sell to the fishmonger for slightly more money. I also got slightly distracted by a pod of orcas, because I am a marine biologist, and I love orcas. In fact, my stream background has a special piece of orca art. But after night fell, I headed back to port and flushed out a special order the fishmonger had requested. After handing in the requested fish for a tidy profit, the fishmonger gave me a new order to fulfill. I sold him the rest of the fish that I had already caught, then headed over to the shipwright to buy back my previous fishing rod. Various rods can only be used on certain fishing spots, and so to get the squids and fish that I needed for that newest order, I learned I'd need both rods on my boat at the same time. So with both rods installed, I headed out again to see if I could catch what the fishmonger had requested. Gathering the squid was simple enough right outside the port, but while I was reeling in my second catch, what I pulled in was a mutated gelatinous sack that seemed like it could have once been a squid. And as if that wasn't ominous enough, there was this sparkly spot in the water that very warmly informed me that the lighthouse that towered above the water would have the brittle bodies of all creatures, both human and otherwise, thrown at its feet. That was almost me my first night here, but I've survived this long, so onwards I went. I returned to the fishmonger to give him 2 of the squids that I had caught, then handed him whatever monstrosity I had pulled out of the water earlier. To my surprise, the fishmonger seemed almost gleeful that I had brought this mutated squid to him. He inspected the gelatinous squid and pulled out a handkerchief, which he then handed to me. The fishmonger told me that this wasn't the first corrupted fish he'd seen, and that he'd pay me well for any more that I brought to him. So I sold him the rest of my catch and headed back to my boat, where I was shocked to see a shadowed man staring at me through my cabin window. "I know what you took to the fishmonger," he said. "And I'll be clear, I know he extracted an artifact from it. I need to inspect it, but not here. Meet me on Blackstone Isle. Head out of this bay and cut south. I have a business proposition that you'll want to hear. I'll be waiting." And just like that, the shadow man was gone, leaving me to my own devices on what had previously seemed like the dock of a lovely little fishing village. So I took that handkerchief and I headed south towards what I assumed was Blackstone Isle. Upon pulling up to the dock, the same shadowed man stood in the doorway and watched me approach, holding what looked like an old, valuable book in one hand. "You came. Good. Allow me to introduce myself. I am a collector of many things, art and artifacts, treasures and truths, and curios that occupy the periphery of desire. And you have something for me." I handed over my handkerchief, which the collector inspected in the light. He revealed that it came from an old ship carrying important items that sank many years ago. The collector wants to retrieve those items and wants my help to do so. So he equipped my boat with some dredging equipment, which is where I suppose the name of the game comes into play. If I bring him the lost relics, he will reward me in ways beyond my imagination. That seemed like a win-win for me, so I accepted his proposition. After the collector installed the dredging equipment on my boat, he informed me that I was looking for 5 total relics: a ring, a necklace, a pocket watch, a music box, and a key. And with that, I was on my way to search for something the depths had once claimed as their own. In my first dredging spot, I pulled up an old ring, which was seemingly not the ring the collector had asked for, but it gave me insight that there may be other valuables lurking below. Valuables that I might be able to turn in for profit. Kind of like another mutated squid that I fished up and brought to the fishmonger. Whilst I was in town, the mayor approached me again and asked if I had encountered a photographer. I most certainly had not, and the mayor informed me that she had headed south and that I may want to introduce myself to her. However, I had other business to attend to first, like talking to the lighthouse keeper. I asked her if she knew of any shipwrecks in the area, following the lead I had just received from the collector, but the keeper seemed wary of my request. Regardless of her apprehension, she informed me that there was a spot around the back of town where I might be able to find some wreckage. However, she also cautioned that some nights you could see an unnatural glow rising from the water, and advised that I'd best leave it there. Heading back into town, I also encountered a new woman sitting on the dockside. She asked me what it was like out on the open sea, to which I responded with my true belief. It's peaceful. She responded by saying it had to be better than this bloody town, and that she may just leave and never come back. Going backwards is a mistake, don't you think? You should always keep moving forward, moving along. She asked me to pick up some materials for her, so that she could build herself a new home elsewhere. Seeing as I was already out adventuring all of the time, and picking up more things than I knew what to do with, I agreed, then went to go pay the mayor one last visit. I only had 77 cents left in my debt, so I paid off my boat in full. While chatting, we came to the topic of the mayor's counterpart on Little Morrow, who apparently went quite mad suddenly. The mayor said that he went from normal one day to hurling people's belongings into the sea the next. Then, eventually, he disappeared. Apparently not many people remember the old mayor, and even fewer like talking about him. But that was all the mayor had to tell me, so I set about my journey once more. I was going out to fish for grouper to finish the fishmonger's request when I got the strangest notification that something had slithered into my hold. And when I went to check, I saw that one of my fish had just been infected with this wriggling, dark mass. As I was sailing around trying to figure out what to do next, I found my first shipwreck, a small boat that washed ashore, but inside I found several things to aid my journey. Notably a citrine ring, which may be the one the collector had requested. Just to be sure, I continued sailing when I got an even stranger notification, that a sickly stench was now rising from my cargo hold. Of course, I immediately checked and found that one of my two groupers had mutated into an entirely different fish. Now it was glowing an ominous green, and I feared that wouldn't be the least of my troubles. Just as I was sailing on, I noticed something strange glowing beneath the waves. As I dredged it up, it turned out to be a mysterious key, certainly something the collector would take interest in. Not wanting any other curses to befall my cargo hold, I immediately took this key back to him. Handing the strange key to the collector, I noticed that it shone in his hands. It was definitely the key that I had handed him, but also somehow different, and I was starting to question my reality a little bit. The key wasn't enough, however, and the collector demanded to know where the accompanying lock was. Seeing that I hadn't found a lock, the collector realized that the pieces must have drifted further apart than he originally anticipated, and promised to aid my travels. The collector began flipping through his book, chanting until something happened. And just as quickly as it had happened, the collector moved on to the next piece of business. That one of the pieces he was after may have drifted towards Gale cliffs, but I wasn't about to set off without knowing what the collector had done to me with that book of his. He claimed it holds the power from the deep, and that he had extended its powers onto me. In return for the key, the collector had granted me the power of haste, which allowed me to travel faster through the water, but at the cost of my sanity. I also took this opportunity to ask the collector a few questions, like asking how long he had lived on this island. While he didn't give me a clear answer, he did reveal that he used to be a fisherman, but came to this island to focus on other endeavors. I also asked if he knew who owned these relics, which he did, but all he would tell me was that they once belonged to an old friend. With a new relic to find, I once again made my way back to Greater Morrow to upgrade my boat and sell what I had in my hold. But as soon as I pulled up to the dock, my plans were interrupted by the lighthouse keeper emerging from the forest. She seemed confused that it was me pulling up to the dock, saying that my engine sounded like the vessel of an old friend of hers. Dejected, she walked away without another word. So I headed over to the fishmonger to fulfill his outstanding order, albeit with a slightly darker and more wriggly fish than the one I had originally caught. As additional thanks, the fishmonger presented me with a crab pot, a new type of fishing equipment I could use to catch crustaceans and other bottom-dwelling creatures. In fact, he had a customer wanting some of those very crabs, so I slept through the rest of the night and set out again in the morning. I headed across the bay to Little Morrow, where I encountered a shop run by a friendly trader. He was willing to take the treasures of the depths that weren't curious enough for the collector, and was willing to give me a tidy sum for anything that I brought. As I was leaving the shop, I encountered a strange man, whom I asked about shipwrecks in the area. This grieving father informed me that his son was lost at sea years ago, and that he was still lost to the waves. Seeing the dredging equipment on my boat, the father asked if I could retrieve any of his son's belongings from his wreck and return them to him, which is a request I couldn't ignore in good conscience. And with that, I returned to the bay and departed to find what was left of that poor man's son. As I was sailing around, I noticed a strange figure sitting on some rocks on an otherwise uninhabited island. Approaching this ominous figure, I noticed their discolored skin and their shadowed face, but they only asked for my help. A single fish is all they asked of me, and a fish I already knew how to find. I left my crab pot at the figure's feet as a marker, then set sail once more. As the darkness fell, I noticed some strange lights flickering in the distance. There was strange humming around them, yet nothing seemed amiss. But there were more distinct lights in the distance, those of a city. So with no other respite from the dark, I headed to the strange new town. Upon pulling up to the dock, I met a resident of this town, along with her adorable dog. When I asked if she needed anything, she told me she had been trying to prepare a special meal for her partner, a local delicacy of aged conger eels. Aged meaning rotten, apparently. Normally, she would bury an eel in the ground to allow them to mature, but seemingly the dog had other plans and would eat the eel themselves. Supplying a slightly rotting fish was a service I could indeed provide, so I agreed to help the woman and went back to town. A retired whaler told me tales of Ingfell, that it used to be a whaling town, but the population moved away as the whales grew scarce. Also of an incident that incited a mass exodus from the area, but had no further details to provide. The last bit of information the retired whaler imparted on me was that there was an old settlement along the cliffs that his brother had moved to years ago, and that he believes his brother was regretting his decision. Having confirmed I was in Ingfell along the Gale cliffs, I slept through the rest of the night. In the morning, I noticed a waterspout, drawing my attention towards another message in a bottle floating in the water, which I added to my collection, then went fishing at the nearby shipwreck. After exploring a bit further and catching a few more fish, I made my way to the floating pontoon on the opposite side of the bay from Ingfell, where I met a traveling merchant. Her pontoon operates as a one-stop shop, a place for me to sell my fish, buy new equipment, and even repair my boat if the need arose. This traveling merchant had also heard of the photographer that the Greater Morrow's mayor had mentioned so long ago and told me where I could find her, but sighed in longing for a camera of her own. I bought a new engine from the trader to ease my travels, then set about my ways once more. After catching an alarming fish that seemed more alien than fish, I was sailing through the cliffs when something unusual attacked my boat. A large, glowing creature bit the stern and damaged my ship. Frightened and somewhat lost, I made my way back to the wandering trader to repair what damage the creature had done, realizing for the first time that these waters weren't just strange, they were dangerous. Fortunately, the trader quickly repaired my ship, and I was off yet again, though this time careful to avoid the inner passages of the cliffs. It wasn't too long before something else came for me. This time what appeared to be a large, glowing shark that chomped straight through me, damaging my engines. I was slowly making my way back to the trader when I received that strange notification from earlier, that something had slithered into my cargo hold. And as if that wasn't enough, yet another large, glowing creature took a chunk out of my hull. Wanting nothing to do with the chaos that was rapidly unfolding around me, I made my way to safety and repaired my ship once again. While I was chatting with the merchant, she mentioned that there were a few rare fish that she would like me to catch and record for her. A fisherman's duty is to fish, and rare fish are right up my alley, so I agreed to aid her quest. And fish I did, until I had the funds to buy and install a better fishing rod on my rig. After testing out my new rod on some nearby sea bass, I ended up at the dock near the cliff settlement close to Ingfell. As I docked, an old man emerged from one of the nearby buildings and greeted me, saying that he didn't receive many visitors around these parts. I asked him why he lived here, seeing as it was so unsafe. He told me that he had stubbornly lived here for a time, happy with his wife. But he was alone now, cut off by land and sea, and left with only the trembling rocks surrounding him. Feeling bad for the old man, I told him that I could help him move to Ingfell, although he informed me it wouldn't be that simple. He had been feuding with his brother over the inheritance left behind by their parents, and the arguing drove them apart. Their argument culminated with this old man stealing the family crest from his brother and running away to the settlement. But that wasn't all. This hermit had since lost the family crest to a creature who dragged houses down into the abyss, and with the debris the creature claimed was the family crest. Not wanting to interfere with such a creature quite yet, I told this old man that I would keep an eye out for his family's treasure, and quickly moved away from the area. That creature had other plans, unfortunately, and swiftly made its presence known by tearing apart bits of my hull. This set my panic level at an all-time high, and all I could think about was sailing to safety. The path back to Greater Morrow was fraught with dangers, and my boat was beginning to look worse for wear after a close encounter with a rogue waterspout, and what I could only assume was something much, much larger lurking below. A flock of red-eyed crows even robbed me of some of my hard-earned fish, but eventually, there was safety to be found in the gaze of the Morrow's lighthouse. To pay for the excessive damage that my boat had sustained, I headed to the trader I had met at Little Morrow to exchange some of my reclaimed sunken treasures, and I finally got my boat repaired and my psyche calmed down with a much-earned night of rest to wake up at the dawn of day 13. Having missed the calm fishing life I thought I signed up for, I headed out to fulfill my fisherman's duties, but the strange occurrences kept following me. My first catch of the day was a mutated cyclopean flounder that couldn't be of this world. But as a fisherman, I also had a business to attend to, and so I returned to the hooded figure I had encountered just a few days ago. Handing over the blue mackerel I had so kindly caught, they plunged their dark, discolored fingers into the flesh of the fish, tearing out its heart, only to shove it into their mouth and eat the heart whole. This unseemly display wasn't enough to satisfy the hooded figure, and as such, they demanded another fish, this time one I was unfamiliar with. Not to be dissuaded by the events of the past few days, I headed back towards Ingfell to see if there was anything I could do to help the old hermit recover his family crest. My plans were not without opposition though, as seemingly everywhere I went in this region, something happened. These eyes floating above the water, peering into my soul, or this massive rock that I swear wasn't there a minute ago. Even the birds returned to claim some of my catch for themselves. Just as the birds loomed overhead, I spotted a small shipwreck washed against the shore of a small island. A boat nearly identical to the one I was currently using, although it seemed that something had happened to this boat. Perhaps the massive hole in the side was caused by something like the giant cephalopod that seemed to be lurking in this area, but a whale friend was quick to aid me before I befell the same fate. I went to the shipwright and installed a new light for my boat to help me see any more strange rocks before I ran my boat ashore with no one around to help. Knowing I had a job to do, but lacking the courage to return again to Ingfell just quite yet, I instead headed in the opposite direction to the site the builder wanted to create her settlement upon. After dredging a few spots in the area, I was able to deliver all of her requested materials to the build site. I set off again to tell the builder the good news when I spotted another ship in the distance. Seeing as I hadn't encountered another boat on the water, my curiosity was instantly piqued, but that curiosity was quickly dashed as the boat got closer. It was no boat at all, but another giant sea creature coming to claim my boat for the depths. Fortunately, its damage was none too severe, but I knew sticking around wouldn't end well for me, so I headed back to Greater Morrow to tell the builder what I had done. She seemed eager to leave this little village behind, so I brought her on board and swiftly delivered her to her new home. I was calmly minding my own business and searching for new fishing spots when a gigantic, glowing, ray-like creature rose from the depths and began pursuing my boat. I could only evade it by swiftly traveling into shallow waters, and fortunately, doing so prevented any damage to my hull. In that shallow lagoon, I saw another boat anchored near a cliff. As I cautiously called out to see who was on board, a frightened courier explained to me that they were supposed to deliver a package to Little Morrow, but they were waylaid by the same giant creature that had presumably just been hot on my tail a minute ago. Having experienced the dangers in these waters myself, I offered to deliver the package for the courier. That lumpy, brown box squelched in an uncomfortable way, dark fluid oozing from the box. The courier explained that it was destined for the dock worker at Little Morrow, the same kind of package that the mayor had asked me to deliver on one of my first days in town. So off I went to deliver that slimy, oozing package to Little Morrow's dock worker. He seemed appreciative of my delivery and said to wish him luck as he hurried down the dock without another word. I set off to fulfill a fisherman's job, and I eventually stumbled upon this shipwreck around the back of Little Morrow. While dredging the wreck, I brought up a tarnished belt buckle, the same one the grieving father had asked for to remember his son by. I returned the buckle to its rightful owner, knowing that these waters had claimed many ships in recent years. I hoped mine wouldn't be among them. It was for that reason that I wasn't ready to return to Ingfell, and I instead headed in the opposite direction to a large collection of islands that the map labeled the Twisted Strand. The reason for that name became clear as I approached. The islands were a network of mangroves, connected by twisted strands of roots reaching into the water. Though apparently, the waters aren't the only dangerous passage around these parts, as I encountered a plane that crashed onto a strip of land, from which I retrieved some poor lost soldier's dog tags. That plane wasn't alone either, as I soon found another one close by, but this time I pulled up a mortar barrel instead of dog tags. These signs worried me, and other cues were telling me that I may have overstepped my boundaries, and that I wasn't quite ready to uncover the mysteries of the Twisted Strand yet either. So I made my way back to Greater Morrow. While I was in town, I stopped to talk to the lighthouse keeper. She told me that the fog was growing thicker, lingering more than it had before, and that there was malice waiting in the mists. Sometimes she thought of Little Morrow's old mayor, although that memory was too painful for her to continue discussing. I knew of a family struggling with their own painful memories, and a family I had promised to help. So I made up my mind, and I traveled back to Ingfell, determined to help the old hermit reunite with his brother. Despite my fear, and despite this large monster with a penchant for damaging my hull, I refused to let the old hermit's story mirror the old mare's. Following the guide the old hermit had marked on my map, I successfully dredged up his family crest, narrowly avoiding a disaster of my own. I headed back to the old hermit's settlement and tried to deliver him his family crest, but he instead requested that I deliver it to his brother in Ingfell, along with the message that he is sorry and he would like to come home. I fulfilled this request, bringing the crest to the retired whaler, who agreed to let the hermit stay in his old workshop. While he worked on clearing it out, the whaler requested that I set some charges to clear a path for easier access around the Gale cliffs, which I readily obliged. The whaler was pleased, and at long last, it was time to bring the old hermit home. I brought him on board and returned the old man to his former home, reuniting him with a brother he had all but lost. As thanks for my efforts, the whaler offered me the sale of explosives, which I could use to access pathways in between other previously inaccessible paths. I knew of one area that needed to be cleared right away, so I headed back to the settlement the old hermit used to occupy, where I could finally dredge up the artifact the collector had asked for, this time an old music box. With that adventure completed, I packed up my things and headed back towards Greater Morrow. My first order of business was to visit the shipwright and make some much-needed upgrades to my rig, after which I knew I needed to make my delivery to the collector. Dragging the heavy music box into the collector's mansion, he remarked that he had something that would make my future journeys more swift. Pulling through the silver tassels in his crimson book, the collector whispered words from the page, and something again changed. I had unlocked a new mysterious power from the cursed book, Manifest, or the ability to teleport back to Blackstone Isle and the collector's mansion. With that newfound power, the collector informed me that the reef in Stellar Basin should be my next destination for one of these strange items that the collector required. I asked what his purpose for these items was, but he told me that he was collecting them for times to come, and that the ocean no longer cooperates with him trying to collect them himself. Yet it seemed more or less fine with me doing the gathering, aside from a few ill-wishers I had encountered along the way. Stellar Basin was the next major destination of mine, but I took one last stop at Greater Morrow to sell a few more fish and purchase a few more upgrades for my ship. As I pulled into the dock, the lighthouse keeper was waiting for me, seeming displeased. But instead of any real conversation, she just warned me that things were grim enough around here without my provocations. What provocations she meant, I did not know, but things were certainly strange and grim enough in Greater Morrow, which is why I set my sights on Stellar Basin. The basin is a tropical reef dotted with shipwrecks, along with the wreck of a small floating laboratory, which I stopped to investigate. Inside the ruined laboratory, I found a hastily scrawled note saying, "Not safe. Expect retaliation immediately. Evacuating to fort." The danger of the basin had clearly made itself known to the research facility, as I noticed cracks in the foundation of the structure that turned into large gashes as I followed them up the side of the laboratory. Something large, powerful, and angry had attacked this place, and I knew it was keeping the item I was after. Double-checking my map, the collector had marked the item as being in the center of the basin, directly in the middle of which there was also this terrifying gaping mouth and tentacles lashing from the deep. The collector needed me to retrieve an item from this creature's depths, but I had no means to confront such a beast. Not even the rocks seemed to want me here. I knew that I had to be delicate in my operations, so I dedicated a bit more time to fishing for new materials, as well as actual fish to increase my funds to hopefully acquire some of the upgrades and resources I believed I needed to finish this mission. While in the area, I stopped by the region I had dropped the builder off at so long ago, and discovered that she had built herself a lovely small home on the cliff by the sea. She offered me a place to rest when I needed it, and a place to access my storage, both of which were exceptionally helpful in my current endeavor. But after much effort, I finally upgraded my hull to Tier 2 and hoped that that would give me the ability to fish whatever was lurking at the bottom of the basin. But I also knew I had a few other tasks that I needed to take care of, so I quickly made my way back to Ingfell to fish up and lightly ferment a conger eel for the resident with the dog. She seemed grateful for my efforts and paid me handsomely for a fish that few others would eat. While sailing around to fulfill other miscellaneous objectives, I stumbled across this tent on an out island near the Gale cliffs, apparently occupied by the photographer that others had told me about. Turns out she had lost some of her belongings on her journey and wondered if I would be able to retrieve them near the Stellar Basin. Seeing as that was my destination anyways, I agreed, then set off to see if I could discover whatever the depths had claimed. Along the way, I stopped by another small isle to deliver another fish to the hooded figure. Just as it had consumed the first, the figure ripped out the fish's heart and consumed it, discarding the rest of the animal. But still, the hooded figure's appetite was not sated, and it required more fish, again of a variety I did not yet know. So once more, I headed to Greater Morrow to sell a day's catch, remembering that I had a special order from the fishmonger for an aberrant fish. As I handed the mutated bass to the fishmonger, he clutched it close to his chest, wringing his hands around its slimy body. While I conducted the rest of my business, a faint whispering creeped into my ears from the background. The fishmonger seemed distraught, then quickly asked me to leave so that he could deal with the creature. Not wanting to hold back the man from his work, I left, only for the door to slam behind me, with metal bars scraping over the boundary. The fishmonger had locked himself inside, and there was nothing more I could do for him at this time. Confused and worried by what I had just witnessed, I headed off in a random direction, only to find myself back in the Twisted Strand. Deep inside the bowels of the mangroves, I found a small campfire with a shoddy dock and a plane buried in the foliage. A formidable old man emerged from the campsite, watching me intensely. "Stranger, from the look on your face, I'd say you've encountered the local wretches. Take a seat." This airman then proceeded to tell me of the local wretches, or mind-suckers as he called them. I hadn't yet encountered what this man was talking of, but given the fishmonger's strange behavior mere days ago, I was willing to hear him out. The airman said that he would ask for safe passage away from here, but he needed to avenge his squadron first. A number of planes had gone down in the fog, crashing into trees or ditching into the water. Those that had survived had rallied here at this campsite, but their numbers dwindled, until it was just the airman left. He said that he had met a few would-be rescuers over the years, but none would help him in his fight. I would, though. I would do whatever it took to help this airman find peace. The first thing the airman needed from me was some equipment that went down with their planes. He marked their crashes' locations on my map, and off I went in search of plane wrecks. It wasn't long before I found the wreck I needed and pulled some tool of war from the sea. And then the mindsucker made itself known to me. A horrid, pulsating creature like no other, and certainly one that warranted the level of destruction I was certain the airman had planned. I returned to the airman, and he informed me that I had retrieved part of what he needed, but he was still missing a piece. Confused, I checked my map for the markers he had promised, but there were none in the area. So instead, I headed towards another marker in hopes of finding the plane wreck far in the distance. That led me back towards the Stellar Basin, the beautiful, horrifying reef I had left a week ago. While exploring the waters around the basin, I encountered this large, gray brick building that seemed at odds with other buildings in this region. Curiously, I pulled up to the dock, only to be greeted by a lone researcher. She said she wasn't expecting visitors, and I introduced myself as a local fisherman. The researcher told me she needed my help if I was willing. I need some help collecting samples to study. I was originally posted at the research outpost on the interior of the basin, but it was attacked. A larger creature emerged from the depths and destroyed the outpost. Now it rests in the center of the basin. As a real-life researcher with plenty of field experience in my own right, let me tell you, losing thousands of dollars of equipment to the ocean floor doesn't feel particularly good. And I can't imagine it feels much better when it's consumed by some eldritch leviathan where you have no hope of getting any of your data back. So of course, I was willing to do whatever I could to help recover at least some of that information. I had already encountered the massive creature once, and it held the secrets I sought as well. I asked the researcher some questions about her research, about her life, about what brought her here. She said she had studied biological sciences at Ironhaven College, that she was the only woman in her department in her year, or the year before, or the year before that. That it's hard not to feel like an outsider in an environment like that, you know? I do know. I was the only non-binary person in my department while I got my master's in biology. I empathized deeply with the researcher, more than anyone else I had encountered in these strange lands, and I was willing to do whatever it took to help her realize her goals. While asking further questions, the researcher revealed that she had found letters from her sister. Letters her sister had sent while the researcher was studying. They turned up in her collection nets, in her sampling tubes. Letters she had never seen before, but they were in her handwriting, in her name. They said things about what happened after she died. This reminded me of the messages in bottles I had been collecting as I explored around the map, and how those letters may be meant for me from someone I had lost. Letters telling me of an engagement, of sailing out to the center of Stellar Basin. A letter saying it has been years since she felt warm. But that was altogether too much to think about right now, and I had bigger fish to fry. I asked the researcher what I could do for her, and she asked me to collect a few specimens of local fishes to help with her research. While most species were easy to gather, she also requested one that required a trawl net, a new piece of equipment that I dragged behind my boat, gathering specimens as I traveled. As I roamed, I found a washed-up pile of debris, the photography equipment the photographer was looking for. I used my manifest power for the first time to return to her and returned her lenses. In return, she gave me a camera of my own to capture images of wildlife. And seeing as I was in the area, I took a quick trip back to Greater Morrow to visit the fishmonger, who had unbarred his door since I was last here. He complained of a blinding headache, but said that he couldn't recall anything else. I brought my collection of treasures over to the trader in Little Morrow and had a conversation with the grieving father about the old mayor. Apparently, in his final days, the old mayor was seen screaming, "Throw it back!" over and over as he chucked people's belongings into the sea. After losing his son, the father said he understood. Heading out of town, the dock worker looked worse for wear, his skin now a pallid white as he stood motionless on the end of the dock, staring down into the abyss below in terror. I stood with him, watching his shuddering breaths as a dark liquid seeped from his ear and plopped on the dock. In wordless anger and terror, the dock worker stared until I stepped away from him. I knew there was nothing I could do for him, and I feared the same fate awaited the fishmonger. But for now, there was nothing I could do to help either of them. So onwards I went, back to the Stellar Basin in hopes of being able to help the researcher if no one else. On my way back to her, I caught the last necessary sample for her research, and I brought it to her immediately. She told me I had successfully caught all of the specimens she needed from the surface, but she needed some from deeper waters. But that was a problem. In order to access the fish she required, I needed special equipment to reach the abyssal depths. She had been working on a special model to aid with exactly that when the creature had attacked the research outpost. The researcher told me she had an idea of how to keep the creature at bay long enough for me to collect the samples, and while she brought her idea to fruition, I needed to retrieve some prototype parts from the outpost. The laboratory was in just as sorry a state as when I had last left it, but the prototype parts were easy enough to find in the wreckage. I brought the parts back to the researcher, and in return, she gave me a sampling device to use in the center of the crater. The researcher also informed me that she had developed a repulsion machine that would produce a bright light and emit a high-pitched noise. It would either deter the creature from attacking, or it would enrage it, but there was only one real way to find out which. The researcher cautioned that I upgrade my equipment before attempting to retrieve the samples, so I listened to the expert's advice, and I made my way back to Greater Morrow to acquire the materials I needed to do so. While I was wandering around collecting debris, I found a castaway who had washed up on shore close to the builder's output. Apparently his ship had crashed in rough seas roughly 2 weeks ago, and my boat was the first he had seen on these waters. The castaway requested I transport him to Little Morrow, so I brought him on board and ferried him to that wretched little town. As thanks, the castaway took a signet ring from his finger and passed it to me as payment. I went back to dredging up materials, where I was terrorized by a boat that wouldn't have helped that castaway. But after enough time, I had the resources I needed, and I was able to upgrade my hull to the next tier, as well as install some equipment to hopefully help me fish from the depths as the researcher had requested. It wasn't long before I traveled back to the Stellar Basin, and I found myself in front of the outpost, ready to test the device the researcher had given me. As promised, a bright light shot out from the top of the tower, and an alarm began blaring from the speakers. It should keep the Leviathan at bay, at least for a while. I made good use of the creature's distraction, quickly fishing up anything I could, from a massive gulper eel to the smallest snailfish. In the very center of the basin was the item I had come all this way for, a jewel-encrusted ring brought up from the darkest depths. But I knew there was more to do here. Not all of my discoveries were grim, as I enjoyed the company of a blue whale and a whale shark while gathering the rest of the samples the researcher had asked for. After sufficient time and effort, I had collected every specimen the researcher was after, passing these hadelfish into her care. The researcher told me she had good news and bad news for me. The bad news was that the samples I had collected had dangerously high levels of cellular mutations. The good news was that she knew the cause. The monstrosity in the center of the basin is harmful to life at a cellular level, damaging everything around it, potentially with intent. The researcher sheepishly offered me a book for her troubles, saying she needed to write about her findings. She recommended that I avoid the basin from now on, seeing as we knew it wasn't safe to be around. And with that, I left the researcher and returned to Blackstone Isle, jeweled ring in hand. I walked in, placing the ring on a table close to the collector, his eyes wide. The collector explained that we were making excellent progress towards his goal, and that while the ring would certainly sell for a high price to any buyer, its value to us extended beyond material wealth. And for my reward, I received another spine-tingling, mind-fogging power from that crimson book. This time, it was a spell for protection, which caused some worry as the collector was sending me to the Twisted Strand, a place I already knew to be full of dangers. While in the area, I decided to stop by Greater Morrow to check on the fishmonger, but the lighthouse keeper was waiting for me on the dock. She told me she knew I must have been around most of the islands by now, and wondered if I had found what I was looking for. I answered her question as honestly as I could, that I didn't know. Her face softened. Remember that you are in control. If you are having doubts, it's foolish to blindly persevere. You can always look for alternative paths. And with that message, the lighthouse keeper turned and headed back towards the lighthouse. Blind perseverance is the only thing that's gotten me as far as I've gone in life, and although alternative paths may help sometimes, the only one I knew at this moment led to the Twisted Strand. A path I knew would not be an easy one, but one I knew I had to travel. And at the end of that path was the airman I had encountered so long ago. I asked him for more details on the minesuckers, and he said that they would stalk you along the waterways and emerge suddenly, screeching their terrible song. It seemed to cause hallucinations associated with one's painful memories, and I was certainly in no mood to figure out what my inner demons were at this point. The airmen said their senses seemed to be based on movement, so moving carefully should help me avoid dredging up something I wasn't ready to face yet. While I was exploring around the strand, I encountered what appeared to be an abandoned campsite. Whoever had camped here had left behind symbols carved into a tree, symbols that detailed a book beneath a wave with an arrow pointing upwards and a cloud hanging overhead. A pentagram with someone lying in the center, and a book above the waves with an arrow pointing down. Without any other clues to go on, I ignored the campsite for the time being and continued my exploration of the strand to find the necessary pieces the airman had requested. I found 2 of his companions down planes with their dog tags intact, but my path was continually being cut off by the ever-moving roots of the Twisted Strand. Eventually, I realized I had dredged up the other necessary components long ago before I even first encountered the airman, and I was able to finally bring him the dog tags of his fallen compatriots alongside the mortar barrel. Then we set the next phase of the airman's plan into action. He had already constructed various traps around the strand, and I needed to bait them inside so that the airman could fire at the minesuckers with the mortar. That would be the end of them. No more nightmares. My part of the plan was simple. I just needed to create a specialized bait from local fishes. So off I went in search of the necessary fish so we could end the nightsucker's reign of terror once and for all. After a day's fishing, I brought back all of the necessary fish to the airman, and he converted them into the special bait to lure the minesuckers. Then came the most dangerous part of the plan, luring the minesuckers into the airman's traps. I found the first trap marked on the map, a large cage suspended over the water. A small receptacle floated just beneath the surface. I dropped the prepared bait inside and quickly backed away. The minesucker was lured into the trap, where the upper cage dropped and kept the monster in place. The airman made quick work of the creature with a small explosion, so I picked up a chunk of flesh as proof of the monster's defeat, then headed for the next trap. The second monster went down just as easily as the first, and the third experienced the same eruptive defeat. As their carcasses sunk back into the depths, I returned to the airmen, my hold full of the monstrous flesh I had gathered from each creature as proof of our success. I dropped the meat at the airman's feet, where he plunged his knife deep into the monster's soft flesh, revealing a glint of metal. The airman tore the metal from the beast's remains, holding it high. The necklace the collector had requested, glistening with gore. While my quest was victorious, the airman had more complex thoughts on our feet. I asked the airman what he would do, and he said he couldn't say for sure. He thought he would be asking me for an escort away from this wretched place, but he couldn't leave his brothers behind. Instead, the airman opted to stay at his campsite in the Strand, now that it was safer without the presence of the minesuckers lurking in the vines. As thanks for my endeavors, the airman offered me a service, to create special bait for my fishing operations that would allow me to catch any fish from the area wherever I wanted. But with our fearful quest completed, I said goodbye to the airman and returned once again to Blackstone Isle, dripping necklace in hand. The collector recognized the necklace immediately, clearing a place for it on his table. Then he began reading from that crimson and silver book once more. This time it was a spell of weakness, atrophy, the ability to harvest an entire shoal with a single spell. The collector swiftly moved on to the business at hand. Only one more artifact remained for me to collect, this time far to the northeast in the Devil's Spine. I had avoided traveling to this region as of yet, but the time had come to face the ancient volcanic forces here. I pulled my boat up to the dock on the temple in the center of the bay and was greeted by an old fanatic waving his hands. He seemed to be under the impression that I was a fresh disciple brought to him via the waves. He said that the rite of purification was almost at hand and that I was to be his replacement. He asked me what my spirit sought. Of the options, happiness seemed the most apt, but the fanatic only considered happiness an excuse to halt the search for something greater. He asked me what my flesh craved, and as a lover of the ocean, the correct option was the chill of the water. For that, the fanatic told me he sensed it in me, a glimmer of what waits below. Finally, the fanatic asked me what the world deserves, to which I responded, everything. The fanatic responded that it deserves everything that is washed ashore, freely given from the deep. But no more than that. That concluded what was apparently my trial. The fanatic told me I had much to learn, but that knowledge would be delivered to me in time. For now, my role as his initiate was to act as herald of the purge, just as he was for the one before him. The nearby spires blazed with eternal fire, yet the stone hearths of the 3 idols lay barren and void. It was my duty to light the braziers with 3 fathomless flames, which he marked on the map for me. As I explored around that ancient area, searching for the flames, I dredged up part of an old stone tablet, but was quickly pursued by a school of fish that slowed my pace to a crawl. In a panic, I used one of the powers given to me by the collector to escape my predicament, and I returned to the safety of the Morrows. I brought the stone tablet piece to the trader in Little Morrow, and he confirmed my suspicion that it was a fragment of a larger arrangement. He himself had one piece stored on his shelves, and promised that he would keep them safe while I acquired the rest. After making my way back to the Devil's Spine, I found the ruins of an ancient lighthouse, beneath which was a cave covered in drawings. Some depicted the birth of a civilization, a beacon of light repelling a tentacled figure emerging from the sea. Others depicted the fall of civilization as a volcanic eruption tore through a tall lighthouse. Monstrous shapes devoured people as buildings turned to ruin. Which depiction we were headed for, I wasn't quite certain, but I knew I had to do what I could to prevent the fall of civilization. After scaring away some other wretched fishes, I encountered the first giant stone slab. It bore a carving of 2 malformed fish, writhing under the sun, and there were 2 shallow grooves along the lower slab. I could only assume that this stone needed an offering of 2 aberrant fish. The second stone I came across required a similar offering, although this time of 2 crabs locked in battle. Next to that tablet was one of the stone tablet fragments, which I dredged from the deep. The final stone slab was locked away behind a crumbled stone wall that required one of the whaler's explosives to access, although I quickly found an alternate route with my banishing spell. This slab required 2 creatures of the deep, which I had fortunately fished up while I was exploring. Upon offering the creatures to the stone, it split in 2, revealing its treasures inside. I claimed the first fathomless flame, then began my search for the necessary offerings to obtain the other 2. Another hasty escape from the flaming fish landed me back in the Morrows, where I had fortunately gathered enough materials to upgrade my ship one last time. But as I was traversing back towards the Devil's Spine, I came across another campsite. This time, the fire was lit, and the camp was occupied by someone hunched over the campfire. I cautiously approached the figure, who revealed himself to be the old mayor of Little Morrow. Did you throw it back?" was all he asked. "What?" was the only reasonable response, as I knew the old mayor had thrown many people's belongings into the sea years prior. "The book!" cried the old mayor. I told the old man that I did not understand what he was talking about. "I'm not seeing things. It's really you, isn't it?" I asked the old mayor who he thought I was, and he turned away, wringing his hands. It was him and his wife. They dredged up that old book, but something cloaked in fog followed it out. Right through the boat. Boom! The old mayor cried into the fire. It spoke. It said it was coming for our breath, that we wouldn't be needing it soon. And then the darkness crashed down. An age later, some of us washed up on the shore, and him, still clutching that book. "Throw it back," we cried, as the fog rolled ashore. We thought, surely, it can still be undone. I asked the mayor what he was talking about. "Silver and crimson, the book, covered in her blood." I told the old man he wasn't making any sense, to which he screamed, "Throw it back!" The man closed his eyes tight, holding back tears. His voice fell to a whisper. "Please, the lighthouse keeper. She saw. She knows where it came from, where it needs to go." I tried asking the old mayor further questions, but only got responses that were fragments of the story he had just told me, unfathomable though it was. Eventually I turned and left, returning to Greater Morrow to see the lighthouse keeper. I asked her what she knew about the Silver and Crimson book, to which even the sheer mention of the thing made her shudder. "You're really asking me? After all this time? You know it must be returned." She looked at me with a pitying gaze. "You have to move on, for her sake as well as yours. Take control. Be rid of that thing once and for all." That was all she had to say, leaving me to my own devices to figure out what to do next. I wandered back towards the Devil's Spine, questioning what decisions had led me to this place, and what had happened before I saw the newspaper ad for hiring a fisherman. In my haze, I began rereading the notes that I had picked up from the bottled messages as I journeyed. I knew the modern time was roughly the 1940s, so these messages were written 20 years prior to current events. From a tattered receipt detailing the purchase of one silver necklace mounted with emeralds, to a proposal with a beautiful jewel-encrusted ring. Many of these notes told a story of love between a fisherman and a beloved wife. A wife who was left a pocket watch by the fisherman's mother. A wife who wished to go fishing with her husband, dredging up treasures from the deep. A wife who was afflicted with a strange chill that conspired to fog her mind. She was there when they hauled up a large wooden casket. She was there when the fisherman pried it open, crimson cloth spilling out onto the deck. She was there when the crashing waves rose to fill her ears. She was there to see her husband stare down into the casket and to see the void in his eyes. But that would be the last dated note I could find. From then on, all of the notes came from a mysterious source, saying that it felt like years since she had been warm, that she did not expect him to write back, just to think of her every now and then. There was just one thing left to do: throw her back. But that was all too much to handle, so I took a detour to deliver a fish to someone, or something I knew was waiting for me. The fish had barely left my hands before the hooded figure's splinted nails were peeling at its scales. The heart was ripped from the fish's body and devoured like the ones that came before. They handed me a book, saying that their hunger had been fulfilled. With that, they closed their eyes, crossed their arms, and fell into a deep sleep, waiting for whatever it was they were waiting for. I ventured back towards the Devil's Spine, knowing that there would be something waiting there for me. I followed my instincts towards a path blocked by rubble, using explosives to clear the way. Beyond that path was an ancient fish unlike any I'd ever caught, a coelacanth, one of the mysteries of the deep. A fish so old it was thought to be extinct. Yet here it was, sitting in my cargo hold. I went to tell the traveling merchant of my catch, having long forgotten that she had asked me about that very fish eons ago. She thanked me for my efforts on finding both the coelacanth and the gulper eel I had caught in the stellar basin, marking down the information she needed on these rare fishes. I checked my crab pots next to the merchant's pontoon, and discovered I had caught the second crab I needed for one of the stone slabs. Upon placing the crab inside, it split in two like the rock before it, revealing its treasures and the second fathomless flame. I took the flame into my hold, then set about catching another aberrated fish to gather the final flame. It wasn't long before an aberrated cusk eel slithered its way into my boat, which I readily delivered to the final slab. It split like the others, revealing the final fathomless flame. With all three flames in hand, I returned to the fanatic on the central temple of the Devil's Spine. I placed a flame into each statue's hands, cold flames crackling. The preparations were complete. The fanatic was waiting. As I told the fanatic the flames had been lit, he said he could feel it, that the chill of the deep touches us now. It was time. I followed him up the steps of the temple. At the top, there was a black stone altar, stacked high with layers of dark, damp wood. He drew an antique pocket watch from his robe. He told me it was almost mine, that it marked the start of my journey, and the end. Still holding the pocket watch, the old fanatic clambered atop the pyre and raised his scroll. He began to chant. I tried to back away, but found myself rooted to the spot. The wind picked up, swirling sea spray around the altar. The cold blue flame rose from the sodden wood at the fanatic's feet. The freezing blaze climbed his legs. The fanatic continued his chanting, no pain detectable in his voice. The fanatic lifted his arms skyward. Seconds later, the frozen inferno engulfed him. It raged for a moment, then abruptly died away. The fanatic was gone, and just the pocket watch remained. I lifted the watch from the pyre, its metal freezing cold. It vibrated in my palm, its clock hand spinning wildly below its cracked face. I had the final artifact in hand. With it, I returned to Blackstone Isle once more. I climbed the broken steps to the old mansion, the waves swelling and crashing against the basalt columns that surrounded me. I paused briefly before crossing the threshold. This time, I didn't readily deliver the watch to the collector, instead choosing to tuck it away inside a pocket momentarily. I asked the collector to tell me more about that book of his. He tried to play coy, gesturing to another random book on his dusty shelves. He knew which book I meant. The Book of the Deep appeared in his hands, sheathed in its dirty crimson jacket. "Go ahead, ask us," the collector said. I asked where he got the book. "Don't you remember? You were there." The air around the book began to pulse rhythmically, like a quickening heartbeat. So was she. I asked who the collector was referring to. "You wanted to forget, begged me. This is what you asked for. Give me the book," I demanded. "You won't change a thing. The book is ours." I stepped closer through the crackling room. The collector lurched forward in response. "What can you possibly hope to achieve?" I went to take the book from the collector, striking out with my fist, punching hard into the jaw of the collector. His face shattered and fell to the ground. The Book of the Deep was in my hands. Understand this, plainly, before you sink us into despair. I know how to bring her back. It's all right here on the pages, and now you've seen its power firsthand. We wield the power to release her from her slumber. We can undo everything. Undo what you did. Knowing not what to do, I delivered the pocket watch to the version of myself that waited in the mirror. Its hands twitched in rhythmic struggle, trying but failing to move forwards. And with that, our collection is complete. I must admit, I am surprised. I did not think you had the determination for such a job. Now, with these 5 relics in our possession, only one thing remains. We will see her again soon. It will all be worth it. You know this. Know what? I asked. It will become apparent soon enough. We must make one final voyage. This time, I will be with you. But it was only day 69 of my promised 100, and I was not ready to end my adventure quite yet. The collector would have to wait in his broken mirror atop his broken steps in this old, dusty mansion. I still had pursuits left on my corkboard, and I still had plenty of fish left to catch. The first pursuit I set my sights on was a questline I had picked up in the first week of my adventure, but was only recently reminded of. The traveling merchant's request to catch and document certain rare fishes, starting with the oarfish that the merchant believed I could find in the Gale cliffs. I will always be the kind of gamer to go slamming my head into a rock wall behind a waterfall just to see if there's anything there. I even have the stupid achievement from Assassin's Creed Shadows to prove it, and this was no exception. I realized that despite this large and impressive waterfall, I hadn't yet rammed my boat through it for fear that the scary Leviathan would sink me. But at this point in the game, I figured I had very little left to lose. Unfortunately, my initiative was rewarded with this lovely little cavern, complete with one singular fishing spot for the oarfish. After retrieving this herald of the apocalypse from the depths, I brought the oarfish back to the trader so she could record its information on her notes. As I explored around the cliffs in pursuit of the mythical fish, I found a black stone altar that had escaped my notice before. Much like the stone slabs in the Devil's Spine, there were 3 crab-shaped indents, waiting to be filled. I left a few pots in the area, promising to come fulfill the stone's desires at a later date, then made my way back to the Marrows. I stopped by the painter's studio to deliver some of the flags I had found along my journey. Then I stopped by the trader to deliver the many trinkets I had recovered from the sea. Then I headed off towards the twisted strands in hopes of finding the last rare fish, the Goliath tigerfish. I found the massive fish hidden behind a fallen tree, finally catching all of the fish that the trader had requested. I brought my haul back to her, finishing out everything the trader had asked me to do. The only remaining task on my corkboard was to complete the stone tablet I had recovered pieces of in the Devil's Spine. I eventually found the last fragment in one of the sunken ruins, hidden behind a pile of rubble that required explosives to clear. With all 4 pieces in my possession, I brought them to the trader in Little Marrow for reassembly. As he put all of the pieces together, they formed new glyphs glowing in the stone. The trader transcribed the message as saying, "When the sky mistakes the stars, and the air grows thick with night, the deep will open its scars. Protect us, O guiding light." The only guiding light either of us knew was that of the lighthouse, but these tablets predated the lighthouse at Greater Marrow by centuries. My mind was called back to the ancient lighthouse I had found above the cave in the Devil's Spine. I knew I had to bring the tablet there to see what secrets it would unveil. I climbed the many steps leading up to the ancient lighthouse. At its base was a solid stone door. There was no handle, but there was a large socket carved into the face of the door. I inserted my fused tablet into the door's socket, where it clicked into place. The door rumbled before sliding aside. Stepping inside the ruined lighthouse, the stairway to the top had long since collapsed. All around were a number of dusty objects, some of which looked valuable, including the flame of the sky, an impossibly bright light with a delicately faceted crystal lens focusing a perpetual shimmering flame. The guiding light that just may protect me from whatever was lurking in the mirror. I returned to the trader once more, who seemed surprised that the tablet had opened the door to the ruined lighthouse, and told me he hoped that I had found some interesting items for him to look at. I did indeed, and I sold him the rest of my findings, keeping the flame of the sky for my own uses. I returned to the Gale cliffs once more to retrieve the crab pots I had left behind, placing 3 unwitting specimens into the nearby stones. The crabs shuddered, their legs clicking into strange angles. Although the crabs were long gone, some unseen power commanded their corpses into action. The crabs scuttled away, disappearing into cracks in the stone. Suddenly, the rock split in 2, revealing a sunken chamber with the mouth of the deep inside. This mouth of the deep increased my odds of catching aberrated fishes, which would help me in my final pursuit for this game. Knowing that I was all but done with the story and had finished all of the tasks on my corkboard, I set my sights on getting as close to 100%ing the game as I could in my final remaining days, which mostly meant fishing every variety of fish. Fortunately for me and for that endeavor, the encyclopedia very helpfully lists what equipment is needed to catch every fish, where to find them, and what time of day they are active. So it was mostly a matter of traveling around, fishing all of the fish I needed in a given area, and moving on to the next. I struggled for a while on some of the aberrations and crab pot catches, but I eventually realized that using the atrophy power that the collector had given me allowed me to deplete a nearby fishing spot entirely with 1 guaranteed aberrated fish. The next 20-odd days passed in a blur with no real goal beyond fishing, just aimless wandering, ticking off boxes in the encyclopedia as various fishes were caught. Monstrous forms entered and exited my hull day in and day out, until only 2 fish remained, both aberrated fish that had evaded my capture. In a last-ditch effort to complete my encyclopedia, I kept a rare infected aberrated sunfish in my hold, with both the crown of thorns sea star and a series of anchovies, hoping that whatever dark matter was slithering around my ship would mutate the fish I needed. And luck was on my side, because at the end of day 98, both fish mutated into the crown of nadir and the anchovy king simultaneously, completing all 151 entries in my encyclopedia. With my last goal achieved, I spent day 99 traveling around the world to revisit the people we had come to know throughout our journey, including the dog from Ingfell. Even if they do like rotting conger eels, they're still a good dog. The painter gave my boat one final upgrade, and I even stopped to say hello to the hooded figure and potentially offer one last meal, although they didn't seem interested. But as I made my way through the Maros, I stopped to talk to the lighthouse keeper one last time, which revealed a new quest option that I hadn't seen before. I have the book, I told her. You've had it this whole time, have you not? It doesn't matter. Make the most of this window of lucidity. Now is the time to act. Do you remember where it happened? In that gloomy darkness behind the bay. When you are ready, I'll point the way. At the dawn of day 100, I told the lighthouse keeper I was ready, that she should show me where I needed to go. We must wait until the night is thickest, until the ocean is as it was, all those years ago. So we waited, from the first light of dawn till the deepest fog of dusk. It was time. Go and do what's right, for her. Throw it back. I followed the lighthouse's guidance out to a spot behind the shores of Greater Morrow. This was the place. Throw it back. The book struggled in my grasp, its weight somehow shifting from side to side. Silver ribbons flailed pathetically against my fingers. Throw it back. I held the book high above my head. A low groan rumbled from the book, echoed by another from the depths. Throw it back. I threw the book into the foaming water. My light went out, and the lighthouse's gaze no longer protected me. Nothing could have protected me from the fate that awaited, but at last, I would be with her, as it should have been all those years ago.